let's try it again. I'm almost ready for your press button. That old joke about playing nice? The first sukkah I ever built was as an adult, and it was, a good 10 years before that perhaps. I decided that I wanted to have a wooden sukkah the way I had seen the one at the Jewish Museum in, not the Jewish Museum, the Israel Museum in Jerusalem. And it's a wonderful sukkah that some family had made, and it was all four sides in wood, and the top was in wood too, and it all painted beautifully. I didn't think I could do all of that, but what I ended up doing was several walls, and the only wall I have left is this one. And my children and I painted it together, and it stays up now because it's too hard to take down. I've tried doing that, it's just very complicated. And then we put up all the rest of the sukkah around it every year. That was my sukkah, and it used to even have doors, but every time I moved I had to leave a piece of my sukkah behind. It was too heavy. And as a child I didn't have a sukkah, I didn't celebrate. And so that was a very satisfying feeling. Right now we're in a mass-produced sukkah that's called klutz-proof sukkah, and we set it up for the sweet.
It's so different.
It's the Sweet Harvest Festival, October 13th, 2008, and we're representing the Jewish Historical Society of Western Massachusetts. Thank you.
Marian Pava. I turned 80 this year, and I live in Long Meadow, Massachusetts, and I've lived here I was born in Springfield and lived here most of my life. And my very first Sukkot experience, since Sukkot starts tonight, was at Beverly and Sam's home on Somerset Street, and they lived on the second floor, and Sam made a sukkah for the very first time when his firstborn was of age to appreciate it. And I remember Beverly and Sam bringing down we had dinner there at night, a huge pot of chicken soup, and everything had to come down from the second floor. And it was such a beautiful experience, the love and the energy that was put into that first Sukkot dinner.
Do you know when it was approximately, with a year?
I say it had to be at least 50 years ago.
And now do you build a sukkah?
No, we've never had a sukkah. My husband passed away 3 years ago. But when we go to sukkah, it's always at one of the Pavas, their children's homes, and they're all beautifully made, and it's just a beautiful experience. And I've been to many sukkah invitations since then, and it's one of the most beautiful holidays.
I love building sukkahs.
When was your first sukkah?
Well, it was in, I think it was the one I built in 1991. Actually, as I think about it, when I lived in Western Franklin County in Rowe, I built some sukkahs, but I didn't really know what I was doing, so they probably weren't kosher sukkahs. But my first one was I built when I lived in Berkeley, California. I had lived in Rowe and then moved back to Berkeley for a year and a half to build my Jewish skills before starting rabbinical school. So I was really into studying about it. The way that I built the sukkah was actually the way that I've tried to build it ever since, which is in the spirit of it being really a temporary structure, to as much as possible not have any preconception of what the sukkah will be. So I went to my little backyard, and with some string and a saw and a hammer, and I think there were a couple of pieces of of sticks around. And then I started looking around at what was there. And our neighbor grew bamboo and was happy for me to cut it down. So I just sort of, without really planning, created this big, leafy, wonderful structure. And it was great. And I was part of a little havara, and people came over. And ever since, I've really tried to do it that way. So last year, I had someone else's sukkah, and I used it, and it was actually the old sukkah from our synagogue. And I would use the panels, but I'm in the middle of building a more permanent structure, which I call my steeple. It's a little backyard cabin. So a lot of that material went into that building project. So this year, I'll get back to the 1991 one. So this year, I went by the local sawmill, and I bought $20 worth of boards, and went out in the backyard with my screw gun. And this year I used a level, and once again made like the best feeling sukkah. And this is like my whole hands-on philosophy, which is we really get something by being completely involved in the making of a Jewish tool, whether it's matzah or sukkah, or in my case, writing Torah. Like there's a quality of a seder when the matzah you hold up, you actually did the labor of building. So even though we have wonderful kits for Sukkot, there's something so midbar-like, desert-like, wilderness-like about, I'm just going to see what's around here and make a structure out of it, and it doesn't have to stay for a long time. So what happened in the fall of 1991 is that I had my wonderful first Sukkot in my sukkah, and then I didn't want to take it down because I loved it. It was attached to the back of my little house. And then the Oakland Hills fire happened. 3,000 homes were destroyed. And earlier that day, I was helping some friends move stuff out of a house in case their house burned down. And I went home and I started just watching burning bits of stuff flying from the Oakland Hills. And there was burning bits of stuff that actually flew across the bay to San Francisco. And this was, after Sukkot, and I realized if one of those lands on my beautiful old leafy sukkah, it will burn the house down. So I had the experience not only of quickly building a sukkah, but of very, very quickly tearing it down and, covering up all the dry leafy stuff. And that's my first sukkah story.
That's a wonderful story.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
My name's Arthur Klein. I was born in Brooklyn, right near the Brooklyn Bridge, 84 years ago. And I lived in Brownsville. In those days, Brownsville was an area where there were a lot of Yidlach there. It was like living in a shtetl.
And everybody built a sukkah.
Everybody, on every corner, there was a sukkah. And on each sukkah, we had to shop around for the
Schach?
the leaves. What did
Schach.
you? The what?
Schach.
Yes. And we all came in from the whole neighborhood. We used to bring in food. My grandma, my mother, we used to make herring and fish and all kinds of things and brought it into the sukkahs. And on each corner there was a shul, a little shul. Every house was a shul on the corners. And we all got together and had a wonderful time.
So it was like a block sukkah.
It was like a block sukkah, yes.
And did you take turns using it, or did everybody eat at the same time?
Everybody ate at the same time. And we used to take old doors and those old wooden horses that you had. We used to put the doors on top of the wooden horses for tables. And we used to spread out the tables with all kinds of fruits and foods. And
What did you make the walls with?
it was the sukkah leaves.
The walls were leaves too?
Yeah, the bamboos was all made of that. And they used to sell that on the street corners for, in those days, like for 10 cents. For 10 cents in those days, you can get a lot of leaves. So we used to have enough to fill the whole sukkah. And used to hang fruits from it and have a wonderful time. We used to meet everybody and just hang out. And it was just a great time of the year for us. Very happy occasions.
My name is Betty Elston.
And are you new in this area?
I've lived here for 5 years. I spent the rest of my life in the New York City metropolitan area.
And you're going to tell us a Sukkot story?
Kind of a Sukkot story. It was the mid-'70s. I was in college, and I moved off campus to live in what was then called communal housing with some other young women, and we were all learning to observe Jewishly. None of us had grown up observant. So we were using the Jewish catalog, the first Jewish catalog, as a guide, and also to be a Jew. Those were our two main texts, that we were slowly becoming kosher and celebrating Shabbat together and inviting friends, boyfriends, relatives and guests. And we would have these huge Shabbat meals, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18 people. We would make the Shabbat meals in teams. So since there were 6 girls living in the house, every week 2 would take control of Shabbat and do preparation and cleanup. And we built our own sukkah in the backyard, just us young women, and I have wonderful memories of eating out there and freezing and having our coats on and shivering, but singing and dancing Israeli folk dances and having the best time. This was in Nassau County, and every Thursday evening in the summer there would be Israeli folk dancing in one of the public parks there. And all of the young people in that area, Jewish young people, would convene in this park, and they had callers, professional callers. And it was, the 70s were a really big time for being Jewish on Long Island in those days. So,
What did you make your sukkah out of?
We got, I guess they were 2x4s at the lumber yard. We put them together with nails and rope, really, and we, not really as built as this, we would string the rope across the top and then take branches and fruit and stuff and just suspend them from the top. So there was no prefab. I don't think they even had them in those days, and so it was really homemade, and sometimes it was really crooked, and sometimes we'd ask a gentleman of our acquaintance to come and help us. But we really, especially in those days of Women's Lib, it was really exciting to be women building our sukkah together. So, sure.
Great story, thank you.
I'm Bill Sweet, and this is my daughter, Shira Natanya Sweet.
And where do you live?
I live in Northampton.
How long have you been in this area?
I've lived in Northampton since 1993. And I made my first sukkah probably in about 1997 or 8, I think, with one of those Sukkah Project kits, which at that time came with like this indestructible paper for the walls. We inherited someone else's large sukkah that we have in our backyard now, and I'm looking forward to decorating it this week for her, because this would be her first sukkah, and we got some vegetables and things to hang in it. But I really hope to see that she takes an active role in picking what goes up in the sukkah. But, isn't that right? So that's my sukkah story, I guess.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, my name is Nancy Katz. Nancy Katz. My name is Nancy Katz, and I was born in New England, in Worcester, Massachusetts, and 3 years ago I moved back to the area after being away for 25 years. And most of my sukkah memories from my childhood are at Beth Israel Synagogue in Worcester, and it was really a synagogue thing. And I don't know if it's the very first time I built my own sukkah, but I was reminded that on 10/9/87 at 6:54, I had a sukkah party in San Francisco. And that may have been the first time, so in 87, that I built my very own sukkah. I had a garden studio apartment in San Francisco, which only in San Francisco can you have a garden with a view, a basement apartment with a view, because of the hills. Anyway, so my friend Michael Weinstock and I, who have the same birthday, built a sukkah there, and we had lots of guests, and it was just wonderful. And actually, one of the things I miss about California is that there we can sleep in the sukkah, eat meals throughout Sukkot, and even sleep in the sukkahs, and that's a really, really special thing.
אני עינת, אני מקיבוץ ברקאי בישראל, מקיבוץ ברקאי, ואני מבקרת פה את איריס ברקמן.
יש לך איזה סיפור על סוכות?
על סוכות? אני יכולה לספר איך עושים סוכות בקיבוץ.
יופי, אבל בקול רם בבקשה.
חזק.
So you're going to tell us how Sukkot is celebrated on a kibbutz.
אוקיי? אנחנו בונים סוכה גדולה 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 לכל החברים בקיבוץ, לכל הילדים, ואנחנו בערב סוכות יושבים בסוכה עם מוזיקה ואוכל ואושפיזין. אורחים שבאים מהאזור שאנחנו מזמינים, שבאים לספר את הסיפור שלהם. ויש גם דברים לילדים כמו פה. זה בסוכות הראשון. בסוכות השני אנחנו עושים ערב של משחקים מפעם. כל אחד מביא משחקים של פעם, ואנחנו גם קונים משחקים של פעם, ומשחקים גם עם מוזיקה וכיבוד, וזה נעים ונחמד.
ואיך נראה הסוכה?
הסוכה, מה יש עליה? יש סכך ויש גדר מבמבוק, לא כזאת, ויש קישוטים שהילדים מכינים במשך השבוע. וסוכות.
אצל משפחת ברקמן יש סוכה?
השנה אין.
Thanks, Jane.
אוי אוי אוי. אוי אוי. אנחנו נעשה שרשרת.
יופי.
הבאנו שרשרת לעשות.
אוקיי, יופי. תודה רבה.
Patty Klein, and this is my daughter. What's your name?
Sarah Rosenblum.
Okay. And the first sukkah I ever built was for Sarah's oldest sister, Johanna, for a group called Training Wheels when she was in preschool. And it was a really short sukkah that we made. And
How short?
It was probably about 3 foot high, just tall enough for the kids. It was really cool. And last year we made one out of wood and trees that we had to cut down in our backyard, right? And we had a whole bunch of people come and help us, right? And what else did we do?
And we had a little dinner in the sukkah.
And we invited neighbors in.
And we invited one of my friends. Noah Miller.
And do you remember the sukkah we made when we were at our old house?
Yeah.
The sukkah we had at our old house was awesome. It overlooked a pumpkin field. And we had all kinds of people over for dinner there. That was the best view, the sukkah with the best view.
We cut down trees and then made it into a sukkah because there was a forest right next to the sukkah. So it was really, really fun.
Thank you. So, what's your name?
My name is Daryl Wish. I'm from Chester, Vermont at the moment, but originally from Freehold, New Jersey.
And what are you going to tell us about Freehold, New Jersey?
Well, I'm in Freehold, New Jersey because my grandfather was Freehold's first rabbi, Raphael Reamer.
Reamer?
Reamer.
And do you remember him?
No, he was gone before I was born.
So does your family continue going to the same synagogue?
My family did continue, as long as they lived in Freehold, go to the same synagogue. And I remember the synagogue where the women sat upstairs and the men down. And then we moved to a conservative synagogue. They built a whole new synagogue, which has been dedicated to my grandfather.
So the grandfather was a rabbi. What was your father?
My father was an accountant. And when my grandfather was a rabbi, he was also a baker, because you couldn't survive on being a rabbi. He had a wife and 8 children. And my uncle took over the bakery. When I was a little girl going to Hebrew school, we'd stop at the bakery, my friends and I, and all get free buns.
You had connections?
I had good connections, yes.
What year are we talking about there?
We're probably talking about 1940s.
What's the name
I was
of the bakery?
born in 1935. I don't remember. It was my Uncle Bill's bakery.
Bill's Bakery.
My Uncle Bill's bakery. I don't remember if it had another
Grandpa's
name.
bakery.
Grandpa's bakery. Uncle Bill's bakery.
But it stayed in the same place?
Stayed in the same place, yes, for many years. Until Uncle Bill gave it up.
So did you ever celebrate Sukkot?
No.
That's what we're hearing. It's not commonly celebrated.
Right.
Where's the first sukkah you ever saw?
I think when I was a little girl, my father would take me to the synagogue and there would be a sukkah there. But I remember it only as a very little girl, and that was a few years ago.
I am Rachel Cassia Trugere Besserman.
Yes.
And
how long have you been in this area?
In the valley? For more than 10 years, maybe 12, 13 now. I love it in the valley.
Okay, so can you tell us a sukkah story? Maybe the first sukkah you had, or the first one you built?
Well, the first sukkah I ever had was probably at Adam's house, probably, when you guys lived at Harvard. And then probably the next one would have been in Jerusalem. And then Kfar Giladi, on Kibbutz Kfar Giladi, the community sukkah.
Do you remember that one?
It was probably such a big sukkah, it looked more like a gymnasium. But there was definitely a sukkah there.
Right.
And the next one would have been the one you created out of blackboards, and you painted, and it's pink and blue, and it's got prayers on it and grapes.
Didn't you paint that too?
Yeah, I helped a little. And the next one would have been in the CBI Sukkah, where I taught. I taught in the Sukkah, a class. And the next one would be yours again, probably, because we live in a small apartment in Northampton. And I enjoy your Sukkah very much. We come to it every year.
So, can you tell us a sukkah memory, or recent or old?
Yes, just this weekend, my partner Leah, who's off camera, and I built a sukkah out of materials we found only in her woods. And so it's with old pine and maple, and we built it as we went along. We dug holes to make the foundations, and she decided to make an X brace in the side, and then decided to add to that. And it's a little taller than an ordinary sukkah, but then and it just by coincidence, it happens to be in her yard right where the bonfire is, so it's a very deep, primitive, authentic feeling, which is what I like about it.
And is it decorated?
Well, we have 6 kids, and we're letting the kids decorate it, so we're starting that process. And if it's warm enough, we may sleep there this week.
How big is it?
Well, it's you measured it with your feet. Enormous. It's enormous. So she measured it out with her feet, which are relatively good-sized feet.
About 12 by 12.
About 12 by 12.
That's big.
Yeah. Yeah, we could.
And is that the first sukkah you've ever made?
No, I've made it a sukkah 2 or 3 times before with a kit. You go online, it's 1-800, order a sukkah kit. And they send you the metal hardware, and then you just get the wood. And I've done that before with my kids, too. That was great, and it was fun, and I've enjoyed it, but this felt like, because it was just Leah and I alone in the woods, and we kept the bonfire going the whole time we were building it, it felt very primitive and very much like what might have happened long ago. I liked it.
My name is Arthur.
Arthur what?
Victor is the last name, 2 first names.
Tell us about the sukkah you built.
Well, I lived in this communal house in Brighton, in Boston, and the man who owned the house, who bought the house, and invited his Gestalt therapy people to have. We're going to have a Gestalt community in a house that we shared. So we all moved into this mansion that he bought, and he was not only a Gestalt therapist, he was also a rabbi, but a very unconventional rabbi, who was given smicha by Zalman Schachter Shlomi. And Zalman is a very nice man, but he's a little too quick on who he gives slicha to. He gave slicha to Michael Lerner from Tikkun magazine. He gives slicha to a lot of people and then regrets it afterwards. Smicha. So Moshe called himself a rabbi because he was given smicha. And we would do Shabbos every Friday. We would do Shabbos, and Shabbos was a lot of fun. And we'd have people come to join us. Most of them weren't Jewish. People would stop me on the street who weren't Jewish. Irish friend of mine, Jimmy Coughlin, Arthur, you're doing Shabbos this Friday? I said, of course, it's Shabbos, come, you know. So people would come to join us. And it was the New Age Shabbos where we had guitar players and people like Rabbi Eisen, Rabbi Carlsbach types with guitars. So it was a lot of fun.
Tell us about the building of the sukkah.
Well, we would hang fruits. We had a big back porch, and we'd make the sukkah out of the big back porch. Big back porch. And hang fruits. And we would hang fruits, and we'd get a lulav, and we'd get an etrog. And, we'd have a little ceremony and say the prayers and sing.
How many people?
Well, it depended. Sometimes it was 10, sometimes it was 20, sometimes it was 30.
So it was a big sukkah.
People would come by and, people would come and go.
How big was the sukkah?
The back porch was like 30 feet long by 10 feet. It was pretty big. And then there was a backyard, that was open to the backyard as well. So people would hang around the backyard.
I'm Peggy Davis.
And I need you to speak loudly because we have music
yes,
in the background.
I will.
How long have you been in this area?
About 22 years.
And where do you come from before?
Minneapolis, Minnesota.
And are you going to tell us a sukkah story?
Well, I was asked before I came in if I remember anything about sukkahs from when I was a child, and we never built a sukkah, so I really didn't have any memories of at home. But then I remembered that one year my mother did hang fruits and vegetables from the tree in our backyard, and we ate a meal under it. And that was our sukkahs. So that's what I remember from my childhood.
So when did you get to build your first sukkah?
I was in my 20s, and I was teaching at the Talmud Torah in St. Paul, and I had high school students, a class of high school students, and I built one with their help in the back of my house. It was kind of like a lean-to, It was one wall was the back of the house. There was a little porch the kitchen was in the back of the house, and there was this little porch, enclosed porch with windows. So we opened the windows and could hand things from the kitchen right into the sukkah. And the students came and helped me build it, and they had a meal in it. And they told me it was very memorable.
Was it memorable for you?
I still remember it to this day. And I also remember that we had some guests. Someone I went to college with married someone else who had gone to the college who had become a Presbyterian minister, but his family was Jewish, and his parents were visiting, and they came over to eat in the sukkah, and they were from Chicago, so I assumed that his parents knew all about this kind of thing. And they were so impressed by the whole experience because they had never seen a sukkah before, they had never eaten in a sukkah before, and it made a huge impression on them. So I still remember that very well. Yes, we do every year.
Mm-hmm. And do your children help?
Often.
They decorate?
Yes, we have things that we hang up in the sukkah every year.
Thank you very much.
My name is Henny Lewin. My Hebrew name is Henya, and that's also my legal name, but everybody calls me Henny Lewin. And I live in Amherst, Massachusetts now, but also in Burlington, Vermont. I'm a transplant. My Sukkot story has to do with when I lived in Burlington, Vermont, because I used to teach Hebrew at the University of Vermont, and I was the Hillel director there. And one Sukkot, what we did is we went sukkah hopping. We went to all the Sukkot that belonged to the Jewish members of the conservative congregation in the neighborhood and the Reformed congregation in the neighborhood and the Orthodox congregation in the neighborhood. And everywhere we went, we were treated to lots of goodies. And of course, we did the bracha on the lulav and on the sukkah. And then we ended up in the Lubavitch sukkah. And that was huge. There was this long, long table, and every single person introduced themselves. And there were kugels, and there was tzimis, and there was so much food that my students really got a taste of the sweetness of Sukkot and what it's all about. So that's my favorite sukkah story. My sukkah was in Israel where I had an outdoor porch, and so I used to sort of create a sukkah on the porch with a schach over it. The one in Vermont, my porch had a glass roof, so we kind of faked it by putting schach on top of the glass, but it wasn't really a kosher sukkah, just a pretend sukkah. But the synagogue had a big sukkah, and of course I taught at Hebrew school at the synagogue, and I used to take the kids there for the brachot. But
Thank you.
My favorite memory is the sukkah hopping.
Sukkah hopping.
Thank
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm Deborah Stoloff, and I went to graduate school at UMass and graduated in 1996, where I met my friend Alicia, and I'm with her today, but I don't live here around here anymore, and I'm feeling really nostalgic today. I live in Plainville, Mass, which is a very small town next to Foxborough, where the Patriots play football, and North Attleboro, it borders Cumberland, Rhode Island. And I'm here with my daughter. My husband's home with my 5-year-old, and my daughter is making a tzedakah box. My first Sukkot memories are of, we moved to Needham, Mass, and that's where I grew up. And way back when, Jews were only shown certain parts of town. So as a result, we lived in a whole street of Jews, and I thought everybody in Needham was Jewish, but no, it was just that little neighborhood. And so we all joined, my mother was one of the founding members of Temple Aliyah in Needham. We used to meet in a church, and to make a long story short, these families became really tight, and at Sukkot we would go different houses. Different house every year would make the sukkah. And we lived at the bottom. We lived at the top of a really hilly backyard. I just remember all the older folks grumbling about having to climb all the way up to get lunch. But anyway, the sukkah was down at the bottom of that hilly backyard, and it was really great. And then it would be at so it was the Stoloff's house, and then it would be at the Krasnow's house, and then it would be at the Spector's house, and then it would be at the Schumann's house, and then it would come back around again. And it was just really good memory. And my daughter, who is in 2nd grade now, doesn't even know really what Sukkot is, so, because we just joined a temple and we just enrolled her in Hebrew school, and here's all her stuff, and she's all excited about it, and she's a quick learner. She's very smart, so.
So you're going to build a sukkah?
No, we are not building a sukkah. Today, actually, our temple had a building brigade, or yesterday, and but we came out to Western Mass instead.
Next year?
Yeah.
Next year you'll build a sukkah?
Yep.
Well, that's wonderful. Thank you for the story.
You're welcome.
My name is Dylan Walter. I live in Massachusetts, and well, I think Sukkah is just a good holiday, and since you get to, I really like the part how you get to eat outside in a tent, but I've never slept in the tent before, and yeah, I think I want to do it this year, but we don't really.
Have a sukkah?
No, but we might be able to invent one before the end of Sukkot. And it will probably be inside, probably not outside. And It's just a good holiday. That's really all.
Okay.
I like it.
Thank you. So your name, please?
My name is Leila Ehrenberg.
And where are you from?
I'm from Rochester, New York.
And do you live here now?
I live here. I go to Hampshire College. I'm studying media studies and feminist studies and stuff like that. So yeah.
And do you have a sukkah story to tell us?
Well, not a specific sukkah story, but just some memories that I have, especially of decorating the sukkah was a big thing in our family. My brothers and I have a twin brother and a younger brother, and we would decorate the sukkah. And one thing that we would always do is make a paper chain, out of the loops. And we would always try and make it, every year we'd try to make it longer and longer. And we'd measure it by how many times we could wrap it around the entire house. And I remember we got to around at least 3 times we could wrap it around the house. Our goal was to cover the entire wall of the sukkah with the chain. I don't think we ever got that far. And a lot of times what happened was it would rain and the chain would get ruined. But it was always a big project that took over a lot of our September. And I remember my little brother would always be the manager, and he would, instead of actually doing it, he would tell us to do it. So that was kind of cute. And nowadays, though, what we do is we do more hanging the fruit, hanging the gourds and stuff, and that's really cool too. And now that I'm bigger, I can actually have a hand in building the sukkah, which is fun. Even though now that we're a busier family, we don't always observe the sleeping in the sukkah part of it. But my little brother, he's really into tradition. He has Asperger's, so he's really into rituals in real life, but rituals yearly rituals and traditions he's really into too. So he's we have to sleep in the sukkah. So it's just something that's really important to him that he always gets to sleep, then we always get to sleep in the sukkah.
Hello, my name is David Scher, and I am basically from Holyoke, and I'm in Holyoke 30-something years. So I remember quite a bit of Holyoke when there were hundreds of families at the Sons of Zion and at the Rafi Shalom, and it was happening. So it's sad now because there aren't all that many families that are still active or still participate. And from experience, my wife and I, we were one of the last families with children to be in Holyoke. And at that point, when my daughter entered middle school, we felt it necessary to move to Longmeadow because she was one of 2 Jewish children left in the school system. And of course, Springfield Longmeadow had a much more extensive community in the JCC. Anyway, this is about Sukkot. And for children, Sukkot is a holiday where you like to be around a lot of other families, because I know when I grew up, which happened to be in New York, it was one of my favorite holidays. And my first Sukkot was a card table that I hauled around to the backyard, and I decorated. And of course, you can't fit too many kids under a card table. And the boys next door were Italian. They were 2 years younger. They were twins. And so I had this sukkah all fixed up, and I felt really good about it. And they wanted to come into the sukkah, and I said, "No, you can't because you're not Jewish." And that was quite the lesson, because I then learned about Sukkot being a holiday that had more to do with nature and the life cycles, and that really anyone, could come into the sukkah, because, it was basically modeled on a way of life. And I also found out at that tender age that it wasn't a kosher sukkah because you couldn't see the sky because it was a card table. So that was my earliest Sukkot experience.
So tell me your name, please.
David Schimmel.
Schimmel. And how long have you been in this area?
Since 1968, about 40 years.
And what brought you to this area?
The University of Massachusetts, the opportunity to start a Center for International Education.
And do you build sukkahs?
I used to when I grew up. We did it, I think, for a couple years here, but I have not been doing it recently.
When you grew up, where was that?
In Baltimore, Maryland.
So can you tell us about your childhood sukkahs?
Sure. Well, my mother was in charge of our shul sukkah. So every year it was a major activity that she both hustled her children, but also her neighbors and friends to come and decorate the sukkah, which was done elaborately with all kinds of pictures and fruit.
And who built it?
I think, I don't know. She was in charge of the decoration. I think they had a frame that they put up each year and they took down, so they reused the skeleton of it that was already.
And you were part of the decorating team?
I was part of the decorating committee. That's right.
So when you left home,
yes.
When was the next sukkah you saw?
Oh, I saw Sukkot, if that's the plural, regularly, but didn't participate in building one again until we came to Amherst and helped organize the school and the Jewish community of Amherst. And part of what we did was to go out to some of the cornfields when they were taking down the corn stalks, trying to get people to give us the stalks, and we'd take them to wherever we were going. I'm trying to remember, in the early days, before 1975, we didn't have a building. So we used to build a sukkah on friends' land, or whoever would allow us to do that.
And the latest sukkah that you've built?
I haven't really built one recently. I've enjoyed the sukkah of, again, going to the JCA, so
So the JCA has a sukkah?
Oh yes, every year they have a sukkah in the courtyard, and also I've been to the sukkah at the Hillel House as well in Amherst, at UMass.
So that's a little bit like your childhood memory.
It is, though without that level of responsibility, and it was more going and having wine and cake rather than being in charge of responsible. Not on the sukkah, not on the committee anymore. That's right.
Shoshana Zonderman. I live in Northampton, Massachusetts. And when I was growing up in the 50s in Newton, in the Boston area, no one made their own sukkah. We all went to the sukkah at our synagogue. It was just something that was not done, although we knew about the holiday. In 1970, when I finished college and I moved to Philadelphia, I was in with a group of friends and rabbinical students. My husband was in rabbinical school, and we started to revive this tradition of making a sukkah in one's backyard. And so in Philadelphia, Saul and I started to make a sukkah in the backyard. In 1974, we moved to Northampton, and we formed a Chavurat Ha'emek. Several families were into making their own sukkah. In fact, we had a progressive dinner. Each year, we would have one course of a meal at one sukkah, another course at the next sukkah, and so we rotated amongst 3 or 4 sukkot. Well, of course, you wanted to have your sukkah looking very nice when the group came to your house. When we built our sukkah the first year out back, we decided, let's start right after the end of Yom Kippur. It was dark. And we went out back, and we had some wood, and we were nailing it to a big tree, an oak tree in the backyard, to keep it firm. So we started hammering. Suddenly up the driveway, a police officer came and said, "What are you folks doing?" Apparently our neighbor had called the police because we were hammering about 11 p.m. at night. And of course, he didn't know what it was about. Well, after that, we started to construct our sukkah during the day. So when we hammered, none of the neighbors would be bothered by this. Eventually, we moved the sukkah away from the tree so that we didn't have to nail it in. And we found a design that would be freestanding and very firm. Someone built a sukkah at Hillel using this design, and we copied it. The secret of the design is that there were cross pieces that kept the sides firm. So now when we put up our sukkah, we keep the sides connected and we carry it into our barn. So we can put up our sukkah frame in 20 minutes. We carry out one side, you need 3 people. We carry out the other side, and then we put the cross connecting piece to connect the 3 sides. We get corn from the local farmers and throw it on the top. Another interesting thing we do is we have a sign-in for ushpezin, the special guests who come. So everyone who comes signs a sheet, and year after year we put up the same sheet, and you can see people's signatures from previous years. And when their kids are little, first they'll scribble, and then as they get older, they can really put their name and do a little drawing. And the other thing we do is every year we have an open sukkah party. Since we put so much effort into decorating and we have the sign-in sheet, we invite people to drop in the afternoon to make little ushpezin shapes, to sign their name, to put up decorations. And of course we have Saul's famous squash soup, my sister-in-law's famous kugel recipe, and some other little treats from our families that are recipes that are in our family. So Sukkot is my favorite holiday, and one of the things I like best about it is the universal sense of this holiday. In the temple, there were 70 sacrifices that were brought on the holiday of Sukkot, starting with 13 the first day, 12, 11, 10, 9, and if you add it up, it comes to 70, because 70 was the number of nations in the world. So by offering 70 sacrifices, they were praying for universal peace. All the nations of the world had a part in this Sukkot Shalom, a sukkah of peace. And I love that image of we Jews being in the forefront of bringing peace to the entire world. It's also the holiday to be happy on, v'samachta b'chagecha. This is the holiday to have fun, to enjoy yourself. So the fun holiday, the multi-sensory piece of the holiday, shaking the lulav and etrog, I love that symbolism, and the sense of this is for everyone. It's universal, it's welcoming. That's why it's my favorite holiday.
My name is Ephraim Eisen.
And where are you from?
I'm from here in Amherst, and I am the rabbi of Temple Israel in Greenfield.
How long have you been in this valley?
I have been in this valley, let's see, that's a good question. I've been in this valley 8 years.
And where do you come from?
I was born in Brooklyn, raised on Long Island, and as soon as I could, I made it out to the West Coast.
Well, welcome.
And I am the proud grandfather of Caleb.
Wow.
Who's also in California.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
So my earliest Sukkot memories are in large, huge Sukkot in my synagogue as a child. Seems like there would be over 100, maybe 200 people would come and populate the sukkah. My job as a small child was to decorate and to string popcorn and cranberries and everything together and make all kinds of cut paper things to hang on the wall. In my older years, I think I had my first sukkah in Ashland, Oregon, and when I was living with my son Adam, and while we were there, we would sleep outside in our sukkah on a regular basis. And it became one of our favorite mitzvot, just to sleep in the sukkah and eat in the sukkah and hang out in the sukkah. Right from here today, from Sukkah Fest, I mean, we're going to Sukkah Fest. We'll have several hundred 21 to 39-year-old people at Eilat Chaim. And it's also a huge, huge sukkah that we'll all be sharing in Falls Village, Connecticut. Every year, my wife and I, Rosalie, help start this large Sukkah Fest, which is a 3 or 4 day musical learning experience. About 4 years ago at our synagogue, I took on the project of getting a new sukkah. We had an old sukkah that was made out of metal, and it looked like it wasn't very sukkah-dick as far as I was it was on concrete, metal poles. It was functional, but it didn't really do it. So we got a big kit, and yesterday, in fact, got together with a minion of people in the synagogue, and we built a beautiful, beautiful sukkah. And this Friday night, we'll have a Kabbalat Shabbat Sukkot service, which is also going to be honoring my 60th birthday.
Just give me your name, nice and loud.
Florence Roth Bond.
And did you ever build a sukkah?
Oh, when I was very young.
Tell me about that sukkah you built when you were very young.
I really don't remember.
Was it your parents' house?
No, I think it was in some relative.
Some relative?
But I don't really remember. I shouldn't have said it.
Where did you grow up?
Dorchester.
In Dorchester?
Yeah.
So did they have sukkahs on the front lawns of people's homes, on the back lawns?
No, usually in the backyards.
The backyard?
Yeah.
And when you lived in Northampton, did you ever build a sukkah?
No.
Did you go to the sukkah at CBI?
Oh, of course.
That's a big sukkah, right?
A big sukkah.
And you brought your kids there?
Oh, yeah. That was important.
That was important?
Yeah.
And her husband ran one of the major pharmacies in downtown.
What was the name of...
My husband was a twin, and his older brother, and their father had died when they were very, very young. So they went to pharmacy school to have a career. And someone in the family heard there was a drugstore for sale in Northampton, Massachusetts. I'd never been to Northampton in my life, neither had my family. And we ended up here. It was the best thing we ever did because it was a great place to raise our children. So the 3 families moved up. So that was big time for Northampton to get 3 Jewish families at one fell swoop.
What year was that?
49, I think.
After the war?
Yeah, oh yeah. It was after the war.
Okay, thank you. So, what's your name?
My name is Jane Kaufman.
And how long have you been in this area?
About 17 years.
Oh, and where did you come from?
Originally, I'm from Cleveland.
And what brought you to this area?
A job.
At the newspaper?
Yeah, I work for the newspaper.
So do you have a Sukkah or Sukkot story?
I do. I realized that it's actually one of my first vivid experiences of being Jewish as a child. I was 4 years old, and we were invited to a friend's and neighbor's sukkah about 5 houses down from our house on Chadbourne Road in Cleveland, Ohio. And somehow that memory just really sticks with me as being a very cozy and powerful experience. It was a Friday night, I'm certain, and the husband of the family presided, and they had 4 kids, and they were all there. And I just found it really powerful to be there and very wonderful. Their sukkah was actually a grape arbor attached to their garage, so it probably wasn't, quote, kosher, and yet it had a huge impact on my experience of being a Jew.
My name is Steve Cronin Townsend.
And how long have you been in this area?
About 10 years.
And what brought you to this area?
Well, my wife and I were living in New York City, where she grew up because she wanted to try it out as an adult, just while she was in graduate school. And then our plan was to go wherever one of us found a job that was close to water, so we could either take up whitewater kayaking or windsurfing.
And did you do that?
Yes, we took up whitewater kayaking. We moved to Greenfield.
So, are you going to tell us a story about Sukkot or Sukkahs?
Well, there's one little thing that just has always stood out in my mind, and about Sukkot, and I've been practicing Judaism for 10 years or so since I got together with my wife, but I just converted a little over a year ago. So I have a lot of memories of, being out in the sukkah with my my wife's family, and I just always remember that her dad, it seems like very often it's very cold in this area for part of the holiday, and everyone else will be in winter coats and hats and stuff eating dinner in the sukkah, and her dad, for some reason, he always wears short sleeve shirts, and he's out there in 35, 40 degree weather and it's in the sukkah. And everyone else looks at him and says, "Arthur, aren't you cold?" And he says, "Oh no, I'm not cold." He just feels like that's sort of part of the holiday. And then
Where does he come from?
New York City.
Oh.
Then eventually he says, eventually he sort of admits, well, this was obviously a holiday that was designed for the Middle East. But he for some reason feels like it would be a sign of weakness to wear a coat and a hat and things.
So, does the family build their own sukkah?
Yes. And I guess my wife and I always have, as long as I've been together. In fact, on Saturday night, her parents were around then, and they're coming back today for the holiday. And but they were leaving, so we built a sukkah Saturday night, and we need to decorate it when we get home.
Who are you?
I am Rabbi Andrea Cohen-Heiner from Minneapolis, Minnesota.
And do you have a sukkah story?
Oh, it's a sukkah story. I do have a sukkah story.
Okay,
Yes, I do have a sukkah
you
story.
Can tell us both stories.
All right, but I forgot the name of the hurricane. But we had lived in Hartford for maybe 4 years, and we were just about to build our sukkah. And we stopped before we finished putting up the walls and the schach because a hurricane was coming to New England. So, Nachamol, the frame stayed, it was all right. But at the end of the hurricane, I called up the phone company. I said, "You guys have got to be cutting down a lot of branches right now, right?" And they said, "Yes." And I said, "Can I come and take away some of the branches?" They said, "No, we'll bring it to you." So we finished putting up the walls of the sukkah, and they came with such a truck, you wouldn't believe it, such a truck full of branches that the gentleman who worked for the company that was contracted to keep the wires clear from the broken branches, they came and they decorated our whole sukkah. They put branches all around, and they put the schach on top. And from there, actually, the next year we did it again in a more organized fashion. I sold schach, and it was a fundraiser for the Hebrew school I was working at the time. That's my sukkah story.
That's a wonderful story.
Yeah, it's a good one.
So, who are you?
My name is Max Page.
And how long have you been in this area?
Well, I grew up here. I was born in 1966 in Amherst. Lived here all growing up, then left to go to college and work, and then came back again in 1998. And I've lived here ever since.
And do you have a story about Sukkot? Did you have Sukkot? Did you build a sukkah when you were a kid?
No, my story is I grew up in a Jewish house, but without a Jewish education growing up. So we had a very tenuous connection to the Jewish community. We went to, my mother and I, my father, the socialist, Marxist, atheist, did not, but my mother and I, we went to high holiday services. But that is, and I went to bar mitzvahs of friends, but that is about to the extent of the connection growing up.
And so, when is the first time you remember going into a sukkah?
It's a very good question. I think it must have been in college. actually.
Which college was that?
I went to Yale University, and I think the Jewish community there, I remember going into a sukkah there.
You knew what it was?
No.
No.
But then I learned. I mean, I had heard of them, but I had not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and the next one?
Must have been in New York when I lived there after graduating college. Probably, I don't know where.
And did you ever build one?
We now build one every year at our own house.
Whoa! So tell us about the first one you built.
Well, we got a kit maybe 5 years ago, and in the mail, and we got the wood and built it. It was great. We don't have much land in our house, but it takes up much of the yard.
And the kids decorated?
The kids are decorating it right now as we speak. In search of some, some corn stalk. Yeah, stalk, exactly.
Hard to say.
Yeah.
So does your father appreciate your sukkah now?
Oh, he likes sitting in there. We make him good food, so he enjoys sitting in it.
And your mother?
And my mother too, as well.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Good job.
There you go.
Okay, hi, Barbara Kozovsky.
And what brings you to this area?
I'm visiting my daughter, who is the rabbi in Northampton of Beit Ahava, and I live in Canton, Mass, so I'm not far.
Oh, not far.
Yeah.
And do you have a sukkah story to tell us?
I do have a sukkah story. For many years, I had a sukkah that had a metal frame, much like this sukkah right here. It was a metal frame, and it got downsized as I moved from home to condo. And on the small little porch, we were putting up our sukkah, my ex-husband and myself. And it was a windy, cold and rainy, windy day, that type of thing. We hadn't gotten out of our bedclothes, just went out on the porch and said, let's put up the sukkah. And as we were putting it together, it's really a three-person project. I was doing one part, he was doing another, and the wind came and blew part of the frame and hit me in the head. And I knew immediately that I had cracked my head. And I said to him, I think I just cracked my head. And he said, can you just finish that side over there? And I said, you don't understand, I think I just cracked my head. And he said, okay. He kept working, and at one point I said, my head is bleeding. And of course he got very hysterical, and we said, we better go to the hospital, which is what we did. And in my sweatsuit, everything that I had on that morning, and we went to the hospital, and there was a long line. They said it would be hours before we could be seen, and I wanted to go home and finish my sukkah. So I had a nurse check me, and they were a little suspicious, which was good because they thought maybe this was a case of abuse, that there was a lot of questioning that was done at the time. And how do you explain to a hospital, which is not a Jewish hospital, that I was building a sukkah? So I said we were doing a construction project this morning and a metal pipe landed on my head, and they questioned that, looked at me askance, and I said, do I need stitches? And they said yes. I said, fine, I'll be back later. So we went back and finished the sukkah. Came back about 4 or 5 hours later. The line was gone by then, and they stapled my head. And that became our sukkah story, that every year after that we wore yellow hard hats, and I think we might be the only people around who put up a sukkah wearing hard hats and having our gear. Construction site, absolutely. I don't think they did this in the desert, but on my porch, yes.
This is in Canton?
This was in, actually up in Peabody at the time. Up in Salem, to be more specific. Yeah.
You still build a sukkah?
No, I've since moved and I don't have my sukkah anymore. I don't have a space for it and I miss it. So this was a wonderful event to have this and to sit in your sukkah. It's beautiful, so thank you.
So who are you?
I'm Saul Perlmutter.
And how long have you been in this area?
I've been in this area since 1974. That would make it something like 34 years about.
A long time.
Yes.
And where did you come from?
Originally, I'm from Burlington, Vermont.
Oh.
But I came to the area from Philadelphia.
So, do they build sukkahs in Burlington?
They do build sukkahs in Burlington, but mostly when I grew up, the main place that there was a sukkah was at the synagogue. And I remember as a kid helping to decorate it and that kind of thing. Not many people had a sukkah at their home. Unlike today, when in this area and in other places, I think Sukkot is really beginning to catch on as a holiday.
So, do you have a sukkah story to tell us? Like the first sukkah at Hillel?
Well, I could tell you.
Hillel rabbi.
I think what I'd like to tell you about, if it's okay, is our sukkah bike ride.
Please. That's why you brought the bike?
Yes. It's part of, that's what I'm saying, it's part of the thing. Even the t-shirt is part of the thing. See, we, many organizations do bike rides as fundraisers. And I love to bike. I do a lot of biking. I bike to work regularly. Actually, my mother-in-law several years ago said, I'm going to give you $300, get something special. Haven't given you a birthday present in a long time. So I bought a bike. That got me biking. And there it is. So, at any rate, we were thinking about doing a bike ride, a fundraiser at Hillel. We came up with the idea of a bike ride. And then we came up with the idea of connecting the bike ride with Sukkot. Last year, 2007, September 30th, was our first Sukkot bike ride. We were hoping for 50 people. We had 70. We had two routes, a 10-miler and a 23-miler, and each one had a rest stop at someone's sukkah. And because it was a fundraiser, we also wanted to connect it with Sukkot, not just by coincidence that it happened on Sukkot, but we said, what's a sukkah? It's a temporary shelter we're supposed to live in for 7 days. So we send students to New Orleans, for example, to help rebuild after Hurricane Katrina. And we said there are people who are living in temporary shelters for a couple years, the connection with the temporary shelter. So we use money to send the students down there. Another thing that's connected with Sukkot is Ushpizin, where we're supposed to invite the ancestors, as it were, into our Sukkot and to show hospitality to them and to other people. So our students at UMass Hillel do a program called Meals on Wheels, where every other week they make and serve and eat a lunch with low-income elderly in Amherst. So we thought that is very much connected with the themes of Sukkot. So that's another thing that benefits from our ride. So in short, it benefits community service programs where we build homes or have hospitality for people in need. And what's a sukkah but a very environmentally friendly dwelling? So we're also using it for environmentally friendly projects at Hillel. So that was our first ride. It was totally fun. It didn't feel like a fundraising event. It just felt like an educational, fun community event, all ages. I was dressed totally appropriately in my t-shirt and I had shorts last year. And so we're doing it again. That's my favorite connection with Sukkot. Now I also have other sukkah stories, like I've slept in our backyard sukkah several times. It was actually my daughter said, how about let's sleep in the sukkah? She wanted to sleep in the sukkah. I said, you can't sleep in the sukkah alone. She said, okay, so sleep in the sukkah with me. So I've slept in the sukkah with my kids. We spent a year in Israel on sabbatical in 87, 88. And we, with our family, we'd always had a sukkah. Even before kids, as a couple, Shoshana and I had a sukkah. So we certainly wanted one in Israel, but we didn't have the money to invest in a whole sukkah. So there was one guy I met who said, you can use the wood from my lift. Meaning when he moved to Israel, he had this crate of stuff that his stuff was in. He let me take all the wood from his crate. So I'm schlepping wood from his crate back to the place. Then I'd be walking my kids to school or whatever, to preschool, and someone would have a little table giving away for free. Take the table. So I'd schlep a table with me on my shoulder. And we built this modest little sukkah in the courtyard. There were about 8 families in this apartment, and about 6 of them had a sukkah. Ours was the most modest of them all. Some of them felt sorry for us and said, here's some art you can put up in your sukkah, here's some stuff to decorate it. But we had a great sukkah and ate our meals there, and it was just wonderful. So we've done Sukkot in many different places, and I love it. It's a great holiday.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
I am the director of the Jewish Endowment Foundation of Western Massachusetts, which is part of the Jewish Federation of Western Massachusetts. I've been with the Federation and Endowment Foundation for the past 7 months, and previously worked with the Harold Grinspoon Foundation. So I've been a Jewish communal professional for the last 4 years. And my favorite memory of Sukkah is really just from this past year. Just last week, prior to as we were preparing for Sukkot, my wife and I decided it was time for us to buy our own sukkah. And so we went online, easy purchase, and received our sukkah prior to Shabbat, built it prior to Shabbat, and it was my first time building a sukkah as a relatively new family, and really looking forward to celebrating the holiday here in our home in Western Massachusetts with our girls and having them know about this holiday and decorating the sukkah and eating in it this week together as a family.
Let's try it again. I'm almost ready for you to press the button. Nice children. Did you do that old joke about playing nice? My mother had a joke about how she'd come home.
What a wonderful holiday we had today, interviewing and celebrating and being together with the Jewish community of Western Massachusetts.